my hope is that people can be their authentic selves and to give themselves permission to take risks and to explore and expand, recognizing that that's not safe for everybody. When a client walks in, they know that they are seen. Regardless what they disclose or what they don't disclose, that there are people that love them, receive them, hear them, and deeply see who they are, even though they can't go there with themselves just yet.
Welcome to the Paul Plett podcast. This is basically an excuse for me to sit down and have a conversation with people that I find interesting. And joining me today is Reece Malone.
Hi.
Reece is a partner, a gardener, sex therapist, a spiritual person, a forager, among many other things. I missed a bunch there, right?
Oh, it all interconnects, Paul,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Welcome here, Reece.
Thanks for having me.
For people who don't know who you are or what you do, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, most people know me, hopefully affectionately, as a sex therapist, a sexuality educator, a friend, someone who is an ally, someone who either is at the front or is in the background. I used to have a performance background as well. For a good significant part of my life before I moved into my current career. As a queer performance artist, I did a lot of drag. I mentored a lot of drag artists as well.
Wow.
And so then that became in the background,
Yeah.
because I had to make a decision as to if I'm going to be a therapist, what branding and what image, particularly in the field of human sexuality, would land with a community where we live in that's still relatively conservative.
Oh, wow.
So I had to make a choice to let go and grieve other aspects of my identity so that I can do my current career.
That is interesting. I've also not in the same way, but I've also had a lot of work. I've done a lot of work on my own identity as well, and thinking about what aspects of myself, where do I place value, how do I see myself, and then also how do I present myself to the world.
Right.
Can we rewind right back to the beginning? Where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, every time I deliver a workshop, the first thing I say is that I'm from Altona. And either people their eyes would light up, or they just have this look of, I'm confused. We're talking about really explicit, intimate things.
Yeah.
Identity.
Yeah.
And you're from Altona?
Altona is a small town in Manitoba.
A small town in Manitoba, Mennonite, close to the border of the United States, farming community, faith community.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's, of all careers, right? My career right now is sex. How did a person like me, but also there's often assumptions because I am a racialized person.
Okay.
When one thinks about Altona, they think about not brown people, right? They don't think about brown people.
People that look like me.
Right.
Yeah.
So I am a brown person whose career is in sex from a Mennonite community in Altona.
Yeah.
And then my parents are also Roman Catholic.
Oh,
Or I
wow.
come from a Roman Catholic background.
Okay.
Well, half of my family is Roman Catholic, and then on my dad's side, there's some Jehovah's Witnesses as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's kind of this unique history background. And then the question is, how did you get in this business of intimacy and sexuality with that mix of people? And and where you're from, where you're born.
Yeah.
And I said, the reason why I'm a sex therapist is because I'm from Altona and my family's Catholic. Like, that's the reason. Wow. And we all have a nice big laugh, but there is a kind of truth to that.
Yeah.
Because when we think about what we're talking about in our communities and what we're not talking about, I just one of those curious kids that was I asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of why, like why, and I didn't feel satisfied with the answers.
Yes.
And so my quest then, went into the liberal arts section, right, of university, because this is where we get to ask a lot of critical questions about culture and society.
Yeah.
And then that's when I moved into studying sociology. So curious about society.
Okay.
And the people in that society. And then it led me to the study of relationships and gender.
Yeah.
And what people's relationship with gender was. And so that all then, it just became this progression where I finally landed where I landed, but I also worked for a number of nonprofits with the same kind of curiosities about family identity, family dynamics, and then all the kind of social, cultural influencers that made us who we are.
Yeah.
And why then people feel so much pain or confusion or ambivalence also in their identity. And then the topic, and I tend to lean into hard topics. That tends to be my thing. I don't know why. Just I lean into the harder questions.
Yeah.
And the hardest questions that I found most resistance is anything to do with gender or sex. And so I just leaned into it, and then the next thing you know, this is where I am right now.
Wow, that's a great summary. Can I ask some questions and try to pick that apart a little bit?
Go for it.
I mean, when I think about Altona, I actually, personally, I think about, Mennonite community, small town, Manitoba, but I also think about sort of Altona, as opposed to a lot of other Mennonite towns, there is a strong kind of arts culture and arts communities where as well. Was that a part of your growing up at all?
It was not, actually. It was farming, church. I remember a lot of chickens around me and wheat. And that's quite frankly, that's all that I remember. I remember going to people's houses and eating pierogies and homemade soups, and going to, when I was a kid, my parents that worked at the hospital, what I recall is that we didn't have a lot of babysitters. And so when my parents worked at the hospital, myself and my sibling, we came along, and then the kind of the geriatric area, or where the older people were our babysitters.
Wow.
And so I just would visit room by room, and I would those were my babysitters, and and that's all. Then coming into Winnipeg was a completely different culture shock for me. It was the first time I saw other racialized people.
Wow.
So that was
And how old were you?
I was 7 years old, and so I didn't understand. And my parents did not teach me the traditional languages when we lived in Altona. For some reason, they guarded us from culture, our other culture, and really reinforced integrating into the culture and society where we were living.
Sure.
Yeah.
Which I think is common.
Yes.
For a lot of folks, is that whatever happened in the past, we've sort of left that behind. We're here now. Let's move forward. We came here for a reason. Let's find that,
It's almost like, if I had to look back, I'm imagining that they were escaping the regimes of the home country.
Sure.
And I could only imagine the traumas they've experienced. I wanted to leave that behind. But I do find it very peculiar, and I still don't know why they chose Altona as opposed to Winnipeg, where they're.
Do they have a choice?
I didn't.
Sure.
I don't know, actually. I mean, my unfortunately, my mother passed, but my father also, and my family of origin, there was a bit of a divide with the radicalness of how they see me. And so
Gotcha.
we
Of course.
just kind of did our thing, and it's still a tension. Right.
So, yeah, this is so. But I mean, you obviously have a lot of confidence. I mean, you sort of move forward through your childhood with this sort of curiosity and saying, I'm not satisfied with these answers. I want to go further, and I'm confident in my curiosity in a way. And did that sort of shape your identity as a kid?
That's a really good. I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Because I knew I couldn't get the answers at home.
Yeah.
And so I relied on other parents to sit me down.
Yeah.
Or it was organic. It's not that I didn't have that capacity back then.
Yeah.
But they were the ones, actually, others, teachers, guidance counselors, they're the ones that sat me down and just sat and I was able to ask them a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah.
That were questions that either my parents didn't have the answers to, or they would give me an answer that was not satisfactory. They would just kind of brush it off. And I had all those questions about developing bodies.
Yeah.
I had questions about what I saw on television.
Yeah. Would you use that language as a kid? Like, that answer is not satisfactory.
I just, in my mind, every time I received an answer I didn't like, in my mind I just said, no, that doesn't work for me.
And is that, did you just have an innate kind of ability to register like, oh, this is something that's honest, true, and this is someone who's guarding something that's sort of leaving something in the shadows a little bit?
Well, so this is interesting. I'm going to kind of look, if we look at other animals, other primates, they have a sense of, an internal sense of injustice and unfairness when it comes to food, when it comes to hunting, gathering. Like, if you look at animals, how they operate, they know what's just and what's not. And I felt that when something wasn't just, even as a kid, I just kept asking the questions. And by the time I was in high school, I already knew what human rights were. I already knew what discrimination was. And myself and support of teachers, we organized the first human rights conference in Manitoba at my school.
Wow.
Because I was that curious. And I recognized that people's human rights for their identity just was not honored. And so there was a panel and this was it was a sexual orientation panel, the first one of its kind, like I said, in Manitoba, because I just was not satisfied with the answers and feeling a real activation or passion for people who felt that they weren't treated fairly. And then everything just progressed from there. But the consequence of my so-called back then, and still today, if you think about it, it's pretty radical. The cost of that was I'm either typically Filipino people. We're more collectivist cultures, not individualistic.
Okay.
So I had to make a choice. Did I want to go with the culture, which is about saving face, guarding against embarrassment or perceived shame, or perceived embarrassment?
Sure.
Or do I just go off on my own and seek individualistic answers? And for whatever reason, I chose that other path to be radically individualistic, independent.
Wow.
Which also meant saying goodbye.
I mean, that last piece is a little bit heartbreaking, but the first piece is just incredibly inspiring to have that resolve. I grew up sort of in a number of different places, grew up overseas, but in Manitoba, I grew up in a small town called Landmark, which is also a Mennonite community. I am Mennonite, so very much sort of growing up in a more conservative environment and also having a lot of questions, not necessarily being satisfied with answers. But I think that my path was probably more asking those questions, pushing a little bit, but not necessarily stepping right outside of the known path, you know, sort of staying a little bit hidden, I guess, in a way. And seeing people, experiencing people that are growing up in a similar environment, but confidently walking outside and saying, no, there is another way here.
Right. But confidence, Paul, wasn't a concept, you know, as a kid. It's not a concept that we have.
Yeah.
It was just, some people just would think of, I think, in my recollections, I would be described as stubborn. That's the branding that children would have.
Yeah.
You're stubborn, you're a bad kid, you don't behave, you stay within the lines. That just wasn't my thing. And I didn't see myself as being a bad kid.
No.
And there's something just compelling when, you know, I would get mad when I don't get I would just get irritated.
Yeah. And was there, I know that I grew up, again, sort of there's a little bit of like the punk rock movement. Yeah. Was there any sort of cultural movement around the sort of, in a way, anti-establishment, sort of walking a different path? Were you attached to anything growing up?
You know, the funny thing is, again, it's one of those things where by the time we were in Winnipeg, and there was counterculture movements. We could look at the different cultures of mods and the bangers and the, you know, all of those. You know, I tried to.
What are mods and bangers?
Oh, so the bangers were like heavy metal.
Gotcha.
Folks.
Yeah, like headbangers.
Headbangers.
Gotcha.
Right? Yeah. Big hair, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But racialized folks, no, we were hip hop. We were Michael Jackson. We were, you know, we were breakdance. And I thought, I don't want to break dance. I'll learn it. I don't want to break dance. I want to be a banger.
Yeah.
I like heavy metal.
Yeah.
And so I just never really understood. You know, people were describing me back then. I just never had a group. I just was kind of hopping, you know, and then I would just hop back and forth. Yeah. And to me, that was it felt lonely at times, but also now a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Because you can relate to a lot of different
I can relate to and ask the questions that other people feel even today, our generation, feeling too uncomfortable, as they don't want to say the wrong thing, they don't want to be hurtful, but then the sacrifice and the compromise is you don't have the answers.
So you graduate high school, you sort of move to Winnipeg. When does there's a lot of things that happen, but kind of two big things that happen is one, there's sort of the performance aspect of your life which starts to grow, and the other is sort of the path similar but a little bit different that leads to the current profession that you're in. How does the performance piece grow? Where does that love come from? How does that manifest itself in your life?
Yeah, you know, that love. So drag as an art form, it's not just about drag queens. It's what's underneath the surface. It is about I'm saying this in a very academic sense again. It is challenging gender norms and stereotypes, and giving oneself permission to explore parts of who they are in a safe, collective environment. That's what drag is. Yeah. And you get to entertain people at the same time. And many of us who are marginalized, who did not receive that kind of attention, this is now deep child wounds from their family of origins, are still seeking that validation. As a sociologist and sexologist, I can look at a number of marginalized identities, particularly around sexual orientation, gender identity, who have not received understanding or validation or being affirmed by their family. And then as adults see that hunger for the importance of closing that gap. And so this is where I work with a number of drag performers. It's not just about your character, but what the validation you so deserve, and to be on stage and feel it from a community that loves and accepts you unconditionally. Right? And so that's amazing.
That's amazing.
if we were to really understand that drag is more than just about people in wigs and dresses.
Yeah.
That there's a deeper meaning behind it. And so for me at the time, I didn't know that was I loved being on stage. I loved the attention, but also recognizing the attention I did not receive growing up.
What was that like? When did you first try? When did you first do drag? How did that look?
This was in, so I am 48 years old.
Okay.
The first time I hit the stage was when I was around 19, 20 years old.
Wow.
So over 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Was one of the first genderqueer performers in Winnipeg. And I didn't recognize, at first I just thought it was for fun and games.
Yeah.
Until I recognized there was something a lot deeper. And the more that I did it, the more that deeper relationship formed in me. And hearing other people's was also an opportunity. As I'm sitting there in the green room getting ready, I get to hear other people's stories and their paths with their relationship with their gender, their sexual orientation, also their intersectionality of their cultures. There are very few, at the time, there weren't a lot of racialized drag performers. There weren't a lot of black performers. There weren't a lot of Asian performers. And so just having the space to just talk about these issues while we are getting dressed and while we are, it became then a healing experience for all of us.
A catharsis in a way.
And then we got on stage, and I remember DC, and as soon I walked out on stage, and there were thousands of people out there, and so it was a real healing journey. And as you could imagine, why would you not want to stop doing drag?
Yeah.
Why would you not want to stop? So that became such a significant part of my life for over a decade.
Yeah. You sort of develop a bit of a career as a drag performer.
There was we did where there was, at the time there were, the movie started with Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And that's with Patrick Swayze was in it as kind of one of the, and at the same time, there were documentaries that were starting as well. So I was part of those documentaries traveling in the United States, trying to explore, or the attempt was to explore communities.
Yeah.
While as drag performers went from city to city to city.
Wow.
And bringing those communities together. So those are... That's stuff in the past, but it's still...
So you start spreading the gospel of drag around North America.
Thank you for... I wouldn't even kind of conceptualize it that way, but it was a community. It was community building for many people.
It's your evangelism period.
Oh sure, we call that. Yeah, but then I get to talk to, again, go deeper with other people's identities and sexualities and. Who was coming to my shows. It was not just queer people, it was straight people, it was white people, it was brown people. And I wanted to hear their stories.
Yeah.
And so while they came to see me, what I valued most was after. And I got to walk up to people and ask them and hear their histories with their identity.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that sexology existed at the time. I didn't know I could make a career out of this.
Gotcha, yeah.
But I was doing it.
Yeah. So there's this other, obviously, as you're evangelizing around North America, there is this other piece that's growing, which sort of was there from the beginning.
Yeah.
Right there from the beginning in Altona, asking questions, not being satisfied with answers, going from senior citizen to senior citizen, learning about people's stories and what makes them who they are, their backgrounds, etc. And then sort of the catharsis of the green room, the sharing stories, hearing stories from different people throughout the drag performances, going afterwards, sitting, asking questions, listening to people. How does that manifest itself in your life?
Well, when I got to sit with people, I got to hear their intimate stories. I got to hear about their intimacy. And that became more curious for me as well, because again, living in Altona, Catholic background. There's a lot of shame when it came to identity, parts of identity, particularly intimacy and now sex. Didn't have the answers. Eventually landed as an education workshop facilitator with one of our local queer organizations delivering workshops.
Here in Winnipeg.
In Winnipeg, but then it expanded for myself privately outside of Winnipeg because I was still curious about the things that people did not want to talk about, which was sex.
Yeah.
At the time when I started Rainbow Resource Center, it was still the culture.
Rainbow Resource Center, that's another organization here in Winnipeg.
Rainbow Resource Center is a local LGBTQ or 2S LGBTQ resource center. And when I started in 2007, 2008, the laws were still different. It was still the flavor of accept us. Never mind what goes on in our bedroom, but at least welcome and accept us as who we are. That was the culture of the time.
Yeah.
We did not talk about intimacy, sex, dating, all that stuff. That just was too radical to talk about. And we were already stereotyped as pedophiles, as hyper sex without boundaries. There were all these, so it was something to just stay away from.
Gotcha.
But then these became the questions of how did we navigate our intimacy? Or how do other people navigate intimacy?
Yeah.
And so which then led me to working at the bathhouse. So a bathhouse is a facility for people to meet up or for people to go to engage in all kinds of sexual flavors, let's just say sexual behaviors. And I wanted to know what was going on in people's bedrooms because that is not what we talked about. No one talked about that.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, why don't I just work there and just watch?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to work there to the place where that's happening.
Yeah.
Since nobody's talking to me about it.
Yeah.
And I get to ask questions. I get to watch. I get to, be curious.
Yeah.
And so I worked at the bathhouse. Again, not knowing that sexology
There's
existed.
a bathhouse here in Winnipeg?
There are 2 bathhouses in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
One is an all male identified one. One is a co-ed swingers facility.
Yeah.
And
This is so far outside of my world.
yeah, and it is a place of it's an erotic playground.
Okay.
These places, and I was I worked at the front desk and cleaned, the rooms and whatnot, and then I got to ask questions.
Wow.
Of the people that were there.
Yeah.
You just walk around. There's a language, there's an inner language. And so that became very interesting and fascinating to me. So I want to go even deeper into it as well.
Yeah.
It's like, what is it like for me to, these subcultures of eroticism, I want to go deeper with them.
Yeah.
But I also want to know who are the people.
Sure.
So the bathhouse became this academic environment for me.
Wow.
Of curiosity.
Yeah.
And just really, again, learning people's stories. Where'd you come from? And all kinds of people, from all kinds of professions,
Yeah.
including the professions that you would never think would ever go to a place like that.
Yeah.
All there.
Yeah.
And it led me to questions about even gender. And this is where the curiosities of speaking to men particularly about their identity, their gender, we would go on these wonderful tangents. So I really, it again became a very organic, but because I was so comfortable hopping from almost like subculture to subculture and asking all these questions, just putting a resume to work at a sex facility was a it was a no-brainer. There was no stigma behind that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just a place of curiosity for me.
Interesting. And then how does that today you're a sex therapist. How do you go from working at a bathhouse to becoming a sex therapist?
Yeah. I didn't know that there was a running joke that I would be Dr. Ruth, a next Dr. So Dr. Ruth, if people don't know, is, this older woman who answered sex questions.
Okay. So that's what you were doing at the...
even when in high school.
Yeah.
By the time I was 16, there were people who would ask me all kinds of counseling type of questions.
Okay.
And people would naturally gravitate to, and I also think it's just a symbiotic kind of energy.
Yeah.
They would ask me questions and want advice and whatnot. And I thought, I joke around and say, maybe I should just focus on sex and be another kind of Dr. Sex or something. And I didn't know it existed until I accidentally came across a magazine in Men's Health. I read an article which really inspired me. I contacted the author and said, I see your name, and there's sexologist at the end. Well, what is sexologist? What is that? And he said, I'm a professor in human sexuality in San Francisco. And then eventually he said, why don't you come to San Francisco? Why don't you come to San Francisco and apply for the school?
Wow.
He then became my professor or my instructor.
Wow.
And that led me to becoming a sex therapist. Working with, and again, I thought I'd be working with women because at the time I felt more comfortable working with women.
Sure.
But as my years went in therapy, more and more men reached out to me, wanting to talk about. They would come in talking about their body functions.
Gotcha.
But then we would leave, or he would leave, recognizing that there's something more to who he is as a sexual being than the function of his body. And so sex therapy for me, I'm only speaking for me as a sex, it's not just about what you do in bed, but it's about all the factors of your identity that inform what you do in bed. And we end up talking about that. And so now currently, even though I see all kinds of genders, a good and a significant number of clients are men from all around Canada and the United States who just want to talk about the things that they were never allowed to talk about, or they were told that they couldn't talk about because that's not what men or boys, that's not what it means to man up, to be vulnerable. And some of the men that I speak with are those, again, you would never think would allow themselves or give themselves permission to be vulnerable because stereotypes. That they find me, they reach out to me, and we talk about all kinds of gender-based identity, sexuality, and that, sometimes sex therapy isn't even the correct title for me because we're not talking about sex. We're talking about oftentimes gender.
Okay, it's like it's the gateway, it's the doorway to have this actual conversation.
It feels like it at this point. It feels like it, and then yes, of course, we talk about how does that impact your body and your relationships and all that other stuff. But it is a kind of gateway to talk about, like, who are you, or let's examine who you really are. Not what culture, society says you should be.
I mean, at this point in your life, having done that work and having had that gateway to bring you to this place, to then having a lot of these conversations, like you said, with men around identity, around vulnerability, etc. Do you feel like you're going through another transition towards something else, or do you feel like you're comfortable, happy where you are? Just thinking about you as a kid, not being satisfied with answers, following your curiosity. Is your curiosity leading you somewhere else?
Probably.
Okay.
Because I have given myself permission to kind of be an enigma a little bit. That I only make choices that I feel that land with my values, my principles, and that can support other people's growth. And that brings me joy. And so I'm looking at how can, in a very respectful, meaningful way, hold space for many, 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 many men to be vulnerable, to to shift or expand the narrative of who men are. And so that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
While at the same time still welcoming all kinds of people to my practice. But as I mentioned earlier, that also meant giving up parts of who I am.
Yeah.
Because the men that see me, typically conservative, Christian,
Gotcha.
white,
Yeah.
blue collar,
People that like me.
who, knowing what my history was, most likely would not feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And while I don't hide my history. It's not at the forefront of any of my media. But if you look carefully, especially men who are, let's say men who are in a closet, who are queer, who embrace all parts of their masculinity and femininity that are not queer or gay or trans, they'll find me. Like you could, there's parts of my website. Everything is meaningful.
Yeah.
To the finest of details.
Yeah.
So that they know that my practice is a space for them to be as authentic as they can be, knowing that all parts of them are embraced and welcomed.
Wow. So, I mean, you've had so much experience. You've gone through, I mean, so many sort of different chapters of your life, from Altona to across North America, to bathhouses in Winnipeg, to studying in San Francisco, to your life where you are now. Do you have is there any particular guiding mantra, principle? Do you have one message for the world?
My hope is that people can be their authentic selves and to give themselves permission to take risks and to explore and expand, recognizing that that's not safe for everybody. If any, that's just not. So I want to hold space for the experiences where those who have to withhold. I get that. But when a client walks in, they know that they are seen. Regardless what they disclose or what they don't disclose, that there are people that love them, receive them, hear them, and deeply see who they are, even though they can't go there with themselves just yet. So it's more of maybe it's an ethic, it's more of a principle, and I hope to present a model of masculinity that is another way of being a male, and that is honest and that is authentic.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Reece, it's always great to sit down and chat with you. I feel like every time I sit with you, I learn so much. I feel challenged, but I also feel encouraged. Encouraged to explore. I feel like you are, in my mind, to me, you are a trailblazer, but really welcoming everyone on the journey as well. Everyone is welcome to explore this space with you. I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down and chat with me today. Hopefully we can sit down and have more conversations like this in the future. But thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anytime, Paul.